Welcome to Biology Minds. Today we're going to talk about the integumentary system pertaining to anatomy and physiology. So the integumentary system is the largest system in the body, 16% of the body weight. It covers our entire outside. It is the physical barrier between the inside and the outside. So we always talk about the immune system and the role that it plays in keeping us healthy and protecting us from invaders, but ultimately the first line of defense is the integumentary system because it is our physical barrier between the inside and the outside. So integumentary system, it consists of the skin, but then it also consists of the accessory structures, the hair and the nails and everything that goes along with it. Two components of the cutaneous membrane. You have the epidermis, that is the outermost layer of the skin, the superficial, and then the deeper or the inner dermis is made up of connective tissue. Some accessory structures, hair, nail, and then exocrine glands. You have the cardiovascular system within the dermis that is going to contain the blood vessels, and you have the nervous system. You're going to have sensory receptors for pain, touch, temperature, and even pressure. The hypodermis is below the dermis, so you have in your skin, you have this area right here, and here we have our epidermis, and here we have our dermis, and then below that you're going to have your hypodermis. And here is a visual for you. You have your epidermis and your dermis, which is made up of the papillary layer. All right, it has these papillae, which actually make up our fingerprints. From our dermal papillae. Right, these dermal papillae are the bumps that are going to help. It's like Velcro. It's going to help adhere the papillary layer to the epidermis. So you have in the epidermis, there's several layers of the epidermis, and the bottom layer is called the stratum basal. All right, or the basement membrane sometimes is called. Or even sometimes called stratum germinativum. All right, they're starting to grow. Well, that's where the growth of the epidermis really starts, that basement membrane, that stratum basal. And then you have the papillary layer, which I said has the dermal papillae, those ridges. It's like Velcro that's going to connect the epidermis to the dermis. There's not a lot of sense feeling in this epidermis, and that's why you're ultimately able to take a push pin or a safety pin, and you can run it through that top layer of your epidermis, and you say to your friends, hey, look, I'm not bleeding, it doesn't hurt, I don't have a problem with doing this. Okay, that's because that epidermis is starting to die as soon as you create those cells at the basement membrane. So we make that epidermis, and ultimately it is dying as you move up through the various layers of the epidermis. Below that, you have this large reticular layer, right, which is going to have your erector pili muscle, your sebaceous glands, your sweat glands. You're going to have your Pacinian corpuscle. You're going to have your Meissner's corpuscle. All of these are within the reticular layer of your dermis. You have various things that are important. So we have our hair shaft. All right, hair shaft is going to be held in place using this hair follicle right here. Within the hair, you have these sebaceous glands, which are oil glands. Okay, so hair is oily because of the sebaceous gland. It helps make it waterproof. It helps make sure that it is slick and nothing is holding onto it. We don't want any mites or any lice holding onto it. So A lot of times you hear about kids that get lice. It's not the dirty kids that get lice. It's actually the clean kids because their hair is not as slippery as or as oily as maybe what you consider the dirty kids. And the dirty kids don't really get the lice. The lice don't like that because it's hard for them to hold on. They can't really stay on there and reproduce and live long enough to make more lice on that hair. You also have this erector pili muscle. Evolutionarily speaking, well, it helps. It makes this hair stand up, stand at attention, and when it stands up, it's supposed to increase the amount of heat that we keep towards our body. But we also think that maybe evolutionarily it helped us to look bigger once upon a time when we were covered with much more hair. You have sweat glands, obviously, for their sweat gland. It's going to go up to pores in the skin, and the pore is going to release sweat in order to cool us down. You have our Meissner's corpuscle, which is starts in the reticular layer of the dermis and goes up through the papillary layer of the dermis, and this is ultimately for our sense of touch. Okay, so tactile means touch. Meissner's corpuscle for sense of touch, and then for that's for light touch. For even deeper touch or harder touch, you're going to have these lamellated or Pacinian corpuscles, which are there for more pressure, sense of more pressure. And then you have nerve fibers, obviously, that are going to connect to the brain eventually. All right, back and forth from the brain. Under your dermis, in your hypodermis, you're going to have this adipose tissue, which, what is adipose? Adipose tissue, which is just fat. And you're also going to have your cutaneous plexus, which contains our arteries and our veins. So if you see there's no arteries and veins up in the derm, or there's very small ones, more like consider them capillaries in the dermis, and then once you get up to the epidermis, there's no capillaries, there's no veins, there's no arteries. All right, but the larger veins and arteries are going to be below the dermis in the hypodermis. Here, this gives you another visual representation. We're going to talk more about this epidermis. Okay, and function of skin protection, excretion, like we said, where you're getting rid of sweat that contains salts, water, and other organic wastes. Maintenance of body temperature, remember, it's insulating you to keep you warm, but it's also helping you to perspirate or to sweat in order to decrease your temperature through evaporation. And then production of melanin. Melanin is our skin coloring. And there are several types of melanin. You have eumelanin, which is like brown, or there's also black version of eumelanin, and then we have pheomelanin, which is found more in lighter skinned people. It's more of a light red color. And then you even have neuromelanin, which we won't get into, which is found in the brain. But when you think about melanin, you have pheomelanin in lighter skinned people and eumelanin in darker skinned people. Some more functions: production of keratin, synthesis of vitamin D3, which is important in making sure that our bones get calcium. All right, decrease in calcium leads to many problems. In children, it's going to lead to rickets. Okay, storage of lipids. Lipids are fats. And it detects touch, pressure, like I said. So touch is our Meissner's corpuscles. And then you have your pressure is your lamellated corpuscles. And then pain is going to be, and temperature, nerves as well. All right, so You have the different part. You have the cutaneous membrane. That is what we typically think about when we talk about the integumentary system, which is made up of our epidermis and our dermis. And then you have any exterior system, hair follicles, exocrine glands that are going to assist in temperature regulation and excretion of waste. And then you have your nail, which is going to protect and support the tips of the fingers and toes, and also are useful in grasping things. Obviously, now maybe we don't use it so much, but evolutionarily speaking, once upon a time we needed our maybe peel fruit, because remember, once upon a time we were frugivores. So when we were frugivores, we needed these in order to get into fruits. It might have been hard to get to the center meat. Epidermis, it is avascular, stratified squamous epithelium. So avascular, all right, not a lot. Okay, nutrients and oxygen diffuse from capillaries in the dermis. So we have capillaries in the dermis. In the hypodermis, we have arteries and we have veins. This is a nice little representation for you. We have our dermal papillae, which are going to make our fingerprints. We have the different levels of the epidermis. Here we go, dermal papillae. Okay, that basement membrane, also called stratum basal, is going to adhere to the dermal papillae of the dermis like Velcro, and it's going to make them stick together. In the epidermis, you have keratinocytes. They contain large amounts of keratin, are the most abundant cells in the epidermis. Thin skin, okay, you have thin skin and thick skin, covers most of the body. Thick skin is going to cover our palms of our hands and the soles of our feet. Okay, so thin skin has 4 layers of the epidermis, and your thick skin has 5 layers. These are the different layers of the epidermis. You're going to see that probably easiest to make an acronym to remember it, or a phrase to remember it. And so, usually I'll say, "Come, let's get sunburned." And I don't think we should go get sunburned together, but that's a way to remember it. So CLGSB. All right, this is the top. All right, external, and this is internal. All right, always remember that, because stratum basal is our basement membrane, so that's at the bottom. That's more internal, and then we move on from there. So if you start from the outside, come, let's get sunburned. And you see that this second layer from the outside, this stratum lucidum, is only found in thick skin. So if we're talking about thin skin that covers most of the body, we're just going to have this come, get sunburned. So there's no stratum lucidum in our thin skin that's in most of the body, but on our palms of our hands and the soles of our feet, we're going to have the 5 layers, which include the stratum lucidum. And as we are creating our basement membrane or our stratum basal, we're going to see that the cells are dying as they move up more and more. And then eventually when you get to stratum corneum, they're dead cells that are constantly being shed. And that's ultimately what makes dust in your house. Most of the dust in your house, people always think that house is dirt. Some of it is dirt, but probably about 90% of that dust is dead skin cells, and that's why if you have a room that you never ever go in, you don't even walk through it, there's not a lot of dust in there. All right, but then when you go into your kitchen, your living room, the places that we are always dwelling, you're going to see there's a lot of dust, because we're in and out and we're always in there, and it's coming from our skin because we're constantly shedding this stratum corneum, and that those dead cells, very microscopic, they are actually creating the dust in your living room that you can swipe off with your finger and show everyone how nasty the living room armoire is. So stratum basal attached to the basement membrane by hemidesmosomes. We talked about those when we talked about the cells and how cells adhere to each other in the tissues. forms a strong bond between the epidermis and the dermis, forms the epidermal ridges. Okay, those epidermal ridges are made by the dermal papillae. All right, and epidermal ridges, they make our fingerprints. Epidermal ridges are the fingerprints made by dermal papillae. Specialized cells of the stratum basale or the basement membrane. You have Merkel cells found in hairless skin. They respond to touch, and then very importantly, you have melanocytes there, and everyone has the same amount or similar amount of melanocytes, but different amount and type of. So we all have similar amount of melanin, but ultimately what makes us different from one person to the next, or what makes one person's skin color different from the next, is the amount of melanin that those melanocytes make and the type of melanin those melanocytes make. So it depends if you're making a lot of eumelanin, which we don't see a lot in fair-skinned people. All right, if you have dark hair and fair skin, you have that eumelanin in your hair, but you don't have so much in your skin. Where darker-skinned people, they have hair, skin, and lighter people have a lot of pheomelanin in their skin. Stratum spinosum, that's the spiny layer, is between the stratum basale and the layer above it. 8 to 10 layers of keratinocytes bound by desmosomes. So these are our skin cells, keratinocytes. All right, cells shrink into cytoskeleton, spiny, continue to divide, increasing thickness of the epithelium. So you see that these 10 layers create like a thick portion of the epidermis. You have stratum granulosum, which is the grainy layer, stops dividing, starts producing keratin, which is a protein, and that protein makes nails. So if you hear about different hair products, we'll talk about how there's added keratin. Right, that's to help create some fibrous protein to make your hair stronger. You have keratohyalin, which is a dense granules, cross-linked keratin fibers. Cells of the stratum granulosum produce protein fibers, which give our skin structure and strength. Dehydrate and they die, and they create tightly interlocked layer of keratin surrounded by keratohyalin. Stratum lucidum is the clear layer found only in thick skin. And then we have the stratum corneum, which is the horny layer or horn layer, exposed surface of the skin, has many layers. These layers are dead, all right, keratinized cells every 2 weeks. So that's why we constantly are seeing dust in our house, because we're constantly shedding this stratum corneum. The formation of a layer of dead or protected cells filled with keratin occurs on all sides. Skin life cycle takes 7 to 10 days for a cell to move from that basement basal to the stratum corneum. So every 10 days, you're constantly creating this new epidermis. Perspiration, insensible perspiration, is the interstitial fluid is lost by evaporation through the stratum corneum, through those pores. All right, and then you have sensible perspiration. Water is excreted by sweat glands. Okay, through those pores once again. All right, so the result ultimately is you are going to be cooled down. Dehydration results from damage to the stratum corneum. That can be from burns or blisters. And then immersion in hypotonic solution, you're going to lose it in seawater. All right. Hydration results from immersion in hypotonic solution, causes swelling of epithelial cells evident on the palms and the soles. Skin color is influenced by 2 pigments. All right, keratin is an orange, and melanin, which we talked about the two types that influence the color of our skin. Right? Blood circulation, red blood cells, you're going to see in fair-skinned people that plays an influence. In darker-skinned people, it's not really going to have effect because you're going to have that eumelanin, which is going to overshadow any red blood cells that are going to influence the pigment of your skin. Carotene is an orange-yellow pigment opposed to the pheomelanin, which is more of a red-orange pigment. All right, found in orange vegetables like carrots, accumulates in the epidermal cells and fatty tissues of the dermis, and it can be converted to vitamin A. Melanin is yellow-brown or black pigment, okay, unless you're talking about pheomelanin, which is more of a red, produced by melanocytes, all right, stored in transport vesicles, melanosomes, all right, and transferred to keratinocytes to produce that appearance of a color. These are our melanocytes. You see this is our basement membrane, so obviously from here up, we are talking about our epidermis, and this below is the dermis. And this is what our melanocytes look like. They're creating melanin, and that's how we see that color in the epidermis. Function of melanocytes, it's going to protect us from UV radiation. Okay, it can cause DNA to mutate and leads to cancer and wrinkles. Skin color depends on the melanin production, not the number of melanocytes. So we all have a similar number of melanocytes, but we have different melanin production. Capillaries in skin color, oxygenated red blood cells contribute to skin color in fair-skinned people. Cyanosis is a bluish skin tint caused by severe reduction in blood flow or oxygen. So when people are lacking oxygen, they turn a blue color, which we call cyanosis, or they are cyanotic at that moment. You have jaundice, which is a yellowing color, right? Buildup of bile produced by the liver, and then pituitary tumors, excess MSH. Addison's disease, right? We're talking about endocrine issues because we are talking about the pituitary gland, and it leads to skin darkening. You also have vitiligo, where there's a loss of melanocytes and there's a loss of color. Another one is albinoism, or people being albinos. They have no melanin, right? So they don't have that UV protection. This is vitiligo. Vitamin D3, epidermal cells produce cholecalciferol, which is vitamin D, in the presence of UV radiation. So you need sunlight. You don't want too much sunlight because it can burn your skin, which is why people have different skin colors depending on where they originate from. Liver and the kidneys convert this vitamin D3 into calcitriol and aids absorption of calcium and phosphorus. So you need vitamin D3 for calcium absorption. Otherwise, you can have, as a child, you can have rickets. This is what patients' legs look like if they have rickets. It's the bowing of their bones. Epidermal growth factor. The dermis located between epidermis and subcutaneous layer anchors epidermal accessory structures, hair follicles, sweat glands, hair root. All right, two components, the outer papillary layer, and then you have the deep reticular layer. We talked about the outer or the superficial papillary layer that has those dermal papillae. And then you have your reticular layer with a lot of the accessory structures in there. Papillary layer consists of areolar tissue, contains small capillaries, lymphatics, and sensory neurons. Sensory neurons play a big part so that you can feel and have a sense of the outside world. Has the dermal papillae projecting between the epidermal ridges, which are going to create our fingerprints. Reticular layer consists of dense, irregular connective tissue, contains larger blood vessels, not just the capillaries, but you're going to have the larger veins and arteries. Lymphatic vessels, nerve fibers contains collagen, which is that strong protein we talk about, and elastic fibers. And contains connective tissue proper. Dermatitis is anything that involves the inflammation of the papillary layer. So a lot of times you go to the doctor doesn't really know what's going on with your skin. You have an infection, you have some irritation, some chemicals got onto it, maybe poison ivy touched it. They don't know what caused it, so they say, hey, you got dermatitis, and you listen to that and you are happy because now you have a diagnosis. But ultimately, dermatitis really means nothing. It doesn't get to the root cause or what really happened. It's just saying, hey, you have some inflammation of your skin. Your skin is irritated, but no one wants to hear the doctor say, hey, your skin is irritated. So they say, you have contact dermatitis, take this and get out of my face. And you do it and you're happy, all right? But ultimately, as long as they get rid of your itching and they get rid of the pain and eventually it goes away, you're a happy camper. But dermatitis, all right, contact dermatitis, that's like a slick way of saying, I don't know what's wrong with you. You have some inflammation, some irritated skin. I'll give you this ointment and it should help with it, whether it was from an infection or some irritation or some chemicals that were put on it. Dermal strength and elasticity, like we said, is from those collagen fibers, those proteins, those elastic fibers. And then you have skin turgor, or the feel of the skin, how flexible it is, from that dermis. Skin damage, sagging, wrinkles, reduced skin elasticity are caused by dehydration. A big one is age, where those collagen fibers aren't as strong as they once were. Hormonal changes, and then UV exposure. So you don't want to get old. You don't want to be in the sun too much. You don't want to be dehydrated, or that skin turgor is going to go down and you're going to get saggy and wrinkly skin. Stretch marks, thickened tissue resulting from excessive stretching of the skin due to pregnancy often, and weight gain. Cleavage lines. So the way that the collagen elastic fibers in the dermis are arranged, they have parallel bars or bundles. It resists force in specific direction. These cleavage or tension lines establish important patterns, and we're going to see that we have these. So I don't know these just by looking at a person, and most doctors won't know these, but a plastic surgeon will know these because they're going to do your stitches depending on how these cleavage lines are, so that it heals a specific way and that you don't end up with scarring. So they know these cleavage lines on your face and some other exterior portions that you might want to keep looking pretty so that you don't end up getting scarring. But I don't know the cleavage lines, and most doctors don't know the cleavage lines, but the plastic surgeon will. You have the dermal blood supply, cutaneous plexus, papillary plexus, venous plexus, and contusion is a damage to blood vessels resulting in black and blue. So we don't say that you're bruising or you have a black and blue, you say you have a contusion, just another anatomical word that you have to remember. But as far as these plexi are concerned, or plexuses are concerned, we're going to talk more about these as we move on later in the year into the circulatory system. This is another diagram for you. The hypodermis lies below the integument. Okay, below your epidermis and your dermis, you have that hypodermis. Stabilizes skin, allows separate movement, made of elastic areolar and that fatty adipose tissue connected to the reticular layer of the dermis or the integument by connective tissue fibers, few capillaries, and no vital organs. The site of subcutaneous ejection. So subcutaneous means below the cutaneous layer, below the dermis. The same goes for hypodermis. Hypodermis is hypodermic needles go in the hypodermis. They go below the dermis. Deposits of subcutaneous fat, distribution patterns determined by hormones, reduced by cosmetic liposuction. So when someone gets liposuction, they're literally sucking the fat out of that hypodermis so that you look thinner. All right, there's a lot of subcutaneous fat or fat below the dermis that builds up, especially in people that overeat or have a bad diet, and that is why people go for liposuction, to get that removed so that they look better, they look skinnier, and they feel better about themselves. Hair follicles, sebaceous glands. These are our oil glands, sweat glands, and nails. These are accessory structures of the integumentary system. You have hair that covers most of your body, a lot of peach fuzz, but on your palms, your soles, your lips, and portions of the external genitalia. You do not have any hair. Function of the hair is to protect and insulate. Okay, it can keep you warm, and it guards openings against particles and insects. So, especially in the genitalia, you do not want to cut all your hair off because it actually helps keep particles and debris and insects out of there. It's sensitive to very light touch. Hair follicle located deep in the dermis. Okay, and then it's going to the hair follicle. The hair is going to extend from the hair follicle out through the epidermis, and that's where you have your hair shaft. Erector pili muscle. It's involuntary, so we're not, using our brain thinking, oh, let me make my hair stand up, but it does it on its own. It causes the hair to stand up and produces goosebumps at the same time. Sebaceous glands are going to lubricate the hair. It helps keep bacteria down. It's also going to help keep lice and mites down. Hair root is the lower part of the hair attached to the integument, and then you have the hair shaft, which is the upper part of the hair that is not attached to the integument. That's going to be freestanding outside of the epidermis. This is a little diagram for you where you have your erector pili muscle, you have your sebaceous gland, which is going to secrete that oil onto the hair. You have your hair shaft up here, connective tissue sheath, which is going to create your hair follicle, and then you have your root hair plexus. This is the internal structure of your hair, so you see that you have this connective tissue sheath, you have a glassy membrane, an external root sheath, and then an internal root sheath. You have the cuticle on the outside, here, cuticle, and then you're going to have your cortex, and then within there, you're going to have your core or your medulla. All right, so when we look at a hair, we have the outside is the cuticle, inward, you're going to have your cortex, and then within there, you have your medulla or your core. A little microscope slide to look at of the anatomy of your hair. You have your sebaceous glands, they're going to create that oil. You have apocrine sweat glands found in armpits, around nipples, and groin. They secrete products into hair follicles, produce sticky, cloudy secretions, break down, cause odors. Surrounded by myoepithelial cells, which are going to squeeze the apocrine gland secretions onto the skin surface in response to hormonal or nervous signal. You have merocrine or eccrine sweat glands, widely distributed on your body, especially on the palms and soles. They're coiled tubular glands. This is what we mostly talk about, is our coiled tubular merocrine sweat glands, and they discharge directly onto the skin surface. Right? These are the ones found on your palms and your soles, not necessarily in your armpits. Sensible perspiration, water salts, organic compounds. Functions of merocrine sweat glands is to cool the skin, excretes water and electrolytes, and flushes microorganisms and harmful chemicals from the skin. Other integumentary glands, you have mammary glands, which in females produce milk, and ceruminous glands, which are going to produce cerumen or earwax. You have control of the glands, autonomic nervous system, merocrine sweat glands, and then thermal regulation, which is temperature. Main function is sensible perspiration, works with the cardiovascular system, and regulates body temperature. Nails protect fingers and toes, made of dead cells packed with keratin, so they're high in keratin. And metabolic disorders can change nail structure. Nail production occurs in a deep epidermal fold near the bone called the nail root. People with respiratory issues often have strange nails, which are called clubbed or clubbing. of the nails or fingers. You have a nail body. Lunula is the pale crescent at the base of the nail. The skin beneath the distal or the outer free edge of the nail is called the hyponychium. And then you have the visible nail emerges from the eponychium or the cuticle. So another word for cuticle is eponychium. And here's a little diagram. You have your hyponychium. All right, that's on the free edge right here. You have your eponychium, which is our cuticle where the nail is coming from the nail root. And you have your lunula, which is like your half moon when you look down at your cuticle. You have your phalanx, which is your bone in your finger, or your phalanges, and then you have your dermis and your epidermis because the skin is covering that bone that ultimately then has the nail over it. Okay, repair of the integument following an injury. Bleeding occurs, then mast cells, which are part of the lymphatic system or the immune system, triggers an inflammatory response. A scab stabilizes and protects the area. Then the germinative cells migrate around the wound. Macrophages, which are more immune cells, clean the area. And then fibroblasts and endothelial cells move in, producing granulation tissue. Here's a little diagram. You have first you get a cut, and then you're going to signal that you need to repair this cut. So bleeding occurs at the site, and you're going to have mast cells coming there for an inflammatory response. After several hours, a scab is going to form, and the cells of the basement membrane or the stratum basale are migrating along the edges of the wound. Phagocytic cells, all right, those immune cells which are going to come and eat up any debris or bacteria, are going to make sure that the site is clean and clotting around the edges of the affected area, partially isolated from the region. And then about a week after the injury, the scab has been undermined by the epidermal cells, so we get rid of the scab by building new skin in that area where there was the cut, and you're going to have the collagen fiber meshwork produced by the fibroblasts proliferating or becoming stronger, and phagocytic activity around the site has almost ended because we've already cleaned everything up, so we don't need those phagocytic cells anymore, or those phagocytes, and the fibrin clot is then dissolved, and after several weeks the scab has been shed and the epidermis is complete, and there's a shallow depression that marks the injury site, but fibroblasts in the dermis continue to create a scar tissue that will gradually elevate the overlying epidermis, and eventually we'll have our skin back and we'll forget that anything ever happened there. So these are the important points in the integumentary system. Make sure that you go over them and you understand that you want to know about the epidermis, the dermis, the hypodermis, and you want to know about melanin and melanocytes and how that the role that plays in skin color, and then you want to know about the nails and the hair and the Meissner's corpuscles and the Pacinian corpuscles and the way that we create new skin when we get a cut, and by forming that scab and then creating that scar, which is going to then create that new skin and create a new physical barrier, even though we opened that physical barrier weeks before. So keep that in mind and go over these several times so that you do the best you can on your upcoming quiz.